committee members. And we have staff, so I think we're good to get started. It's 6:06. I'll call the Finance and Operations Committee meeting to order. Thank you all for joining. You can let the minutes show that committee members, Figdor, Yusuf, and myself are all present, unless we need something more formal in terms of a roll call this evening. No? Okay. There's no minutes to review this evening, as this is a newly formed constitution of the Finance and Operations Committee. And tonight we'll be getting grounded in the road ahead, particularly for budget season, looking at our planning process and making some decisions around the calendar and getting some preliminary updates on what we'll be looking at or could be looking at when it comes to the budget. We'll talk about capital improvement projects, and I will hand things over to the superintendent to run us through.
Good evening. Sorry we're late, and thank you, Mr. Burke, for the sort of the agenda review. So we're going to dive right in. The first three items are really related to the budget, preparations for the budget, and the last two are about capital improvement and sort of more broadly just operations updates from department heads. So the first item is the reviewing and finalizing the FY23 sort of board and council budget calendar, because the next piece is, sort of just giving you some visibility into our internal calendar. But, this is, I believe the previous iteration of the Finance Committee had reviewed a initial version of the calendar for the board and council and, sort of external, the outside facing calendar. And since then, Kathy Winchenbach had met with city staff to review that, and we have a revision of that budget calendar that we wanted to walk through with you today, just to give some visibility to it. I know that I shared this with board members, and that it is not, this is not intended to be like, this is what it's going to be. This is intended to be, this is where it is right now. And then we need to make sure that as a committee that you're, and representing the board at large, that, this is a budget and a budget calendar that you can work with. So, so it might make sense for me to just sort of walk through it, Kathy, just where, the major pieces of it. Kathy, I know you had a deck for today. Are you planning to use that, or?
I actually have the calendar if you want me to pull that up as well. I know it's attached to the agenda, but.
Yeah, I think, I know that one of the slides, the first slide in the deck was the overview of the calendar requirements.
The parameters, yep.
Yeah, so I think
would you like to see that?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, instead of like trying to scroll down to the end of the actual budget PDF, that, if people could see that. And then we can look at the budget PDF to.
So these are the parameters.
Yeah. And then if everybody has the actual budget PDF, side by side with this. So the way that we've got the calendar set up right now is that we are starting, and this is customary for us, and it's always a week before the when we roll the, when we present the budget to the board, which is scheduled for March 15th. We do an open forum for the community just to give them an idea of, basics of the budget and, a preview of what we know about the general conditions, how much state funding we have, what the implications are of that, so I think that's what that first piece on Monday, March 7th is a budget. It's a budget forum. Usually the finance committee attends, but not always. And, it is really like a, Kathy and I will lead that, that session. So the kickoff is on the 15th with, my budget presentation to the board. So then we have, the main function, of that first introduction. That's a regularly scheduled meeting. That's the second meeting of the month for the board. And, the board's only action with respect to the budget at that meeting is to refer it to committee for committee review before it comes back to the board for a vote. So under this calendar, you would refer it to Finance Committee on the 15th. Finance Committee would meet to begin the review on March 17th. So that's the Thursday following that. And then would meet again on March 21st to vote to recommend it to the board for the board to go through its process. Emily.
I just want to flag that that's a really quick turnaround and just a very brief period for the finance committee to be able to take in the entire budget and get into the granular details that we always need to, and get additional information we need, and have a discussion about it and fully understand it, and then report it out to the full school board. That feels far too short for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you. And that's why we wanted to, to put this on the table and just kind of, figure out where the give is, and what, with those parameters, what are the different things that we might be able to do? Because then, sort of, let me just walk through that, right? The assuming that you've done that very, tight review period, it would go to the board the following day in a special meeting for a first read, right? And there would be, it's a first reading with a workshop. And that would be a special meeting of the board, because that would be, again, it's a funky month where we start on the 1st is the first, board meeting. On the, 15th is the second board meeting. And then, we're done for the month. And so we would have to call a special meeting on March 22nd for the workshop and the first read, and on the 29th to have it approved. In between that, we would have the first joint city and school finance committee meeting. And I think, this is one of the places where I'm a little bit uncomfortable with it. We've traditionally had that meeting prior to the board taking action, because, oftentimes what comes out of that finance committee meeting is, well, that's not, that's too high, frankly, and therefore, can we make adjustments? And by the time that we're actually having that meeting, you will already have had it in a first read, and you've had a workshop on it. And then we would need to make any adjustments and bring forward for approval something that was not reviewed in the first read. So that's an area of concern for me in terms of, sound process back and forth between the two bodies. So then, then we're done on the school board side in this scenario. On the 29th at the second special meeting, the board approves a budget and then presents it on April 5th to the city council. From that point forward, it's no longer the board's budget. We're in essence done unless the council tells us to do something. So that's the part where, it feels a lot tighter than what, than it's felt in previous years. And so I know that that's something that, that you wanted to discuss today.
And I just share what the city shared with me was that typically you wouldn't meet with the joint finance and city finance committees wouldn't meet until it was referred to the council, and the council referred it to the committee. And then that kind of flips it upside down a little bit too, because I guess last year and the year before were different and not according to how we've done it in the past because of COVID, but
I think the problem last year was the council referred it to committee and considered and voted it on it in committee before we were able to present it to them. That was the problem last year. So we never formally presented it to them after the committee had taken action. So that's what we want to make sure that when we present it to them, when they make that just the committee referral, that we're able to present it to them that night.
I think 2 years ago, while COVID was a thing, the planning that we did together with the city was to try to address some of the rubs from previous years, to start a conversation sooner rather than later. And then I think that held because of COVID for last year. So, Superintendent, we're at the point where you want committee discussion and recommendations on this calendar? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be helpful. I'm looking at the FY21 budget and I'm not saying this is right. And obviously this was, uncomfortable for the city, but the school board's approval of the budget was May 26th.
Yeah. So first of all, look over to Mr. Youssef. Do you have any comments or questions at this point?
No, thank you.
Okay. Chair Figdor, do you have other questions or comments?
Well, just looking at how we can propose something else, I wonder if the submission to the council has to be before no later than April 26th. Just looking at the council dates, could we work backwards from submitting it to the council on the 18th? Oh, I'm sorry. On the 18th.
So, let me just drop this in the chat, which is the FY19, which was the last one before COVID, the calendar.
Just a quick question. Emily, do you mean 18th of April?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Did I say, if I said a different month, my apologies.
No, you didn't.
In this timeline that I'm looking at now, which is the FY19 one, we started the process, a tad earlier, a week earlier. And the referral to the city was on April 18th. You know, it was voted on April 12th and presented on April 18th.
That seems like a better endpoint to work from.
And we had two joint finance committee meetings along the way. So we had one on Thursday, March 22nd was the first one. And on Thursday, April 5th was the second one. Then the school board had, you know, at least one set of input from the city prior to the first read. And another one, you know, between the first and the second, between the first read and the vote. So the second one was on April 5th.
So are we still going to have two meetings or?
Are we still going to have two joint finance committee meetings?
Yes.
Yes, that's by charter. We are required to have two of them. Yes. Can you, Kathy, put the slide back up, please?
So I would add, you know, greater comfort along with what we're describing now, and for the reasons that Chair Figdor has raised. It does feel really tight through that 7-meeting marathon in March. Not that there's not as many meetings in that 2018 version that we're looking at now, but what's required as outputs from each meeting is different.
One other thing that hasn't been mentioned yet is just how an abbreviated process will make it more difficult for the public to be involved. You know, it just takes time for people to learn what's in a budget and to be able to plan to attend meetings and this is so tight that I think we would limit the ability of the public to participate as well, and that certainly is not something any of us want to do.
Is there a city council meeting on the 18th of April, or is that the problem, Kathy, that there is no city council meeting on April 18th?
Sorry, I am not exactly sure. This has gone through several departments at the city, including the city clerk. So
I'll hop on their website and
I was going to do that. Because that to me would give us the window, right? If we were able to bring it to the council on I don't see their calendar, so I don't know.
Jane's chatting that April 18th is Patriots Day.
So that's probably our vacation week. So that's maybe what I should be looking at.
I just found their, it does say remote city council. I can share this, but it says on the 18th remote city council meeting, April 18th. It also does note that it is Patriots Day and that city buildings are closed.
That would still fulfill the requirement that we present it no later than April 26th. So maybe that's what we'll do, Kathy, is go back and see if we can push to the next meeting of the city council, and then we can adjust our schedule. We can adjust the board's portion of the schedule. Our calendar for April. Is April 5th and April 12th. Because April 19th is spring break. I think that may be the challenge. That might be what is throwing a monkey wrench into this, is that the city does not meet during the school vacation week.
But the city does meet during school vacation week, right?
They do not.
Really? Well, then they would have to that meeting currently is on their schedule. And if not, I assume that they would move it to the 11th or the 25th, but it's currently on their schedule. If you look at the link I sent, it's there. And it's not ideal for us to present the budget during school vacation week, but I think my personal preference would be to give us more time to consider our budget and present it during school vacation week. And then the city council holds, at least this year, they held a second public hearing on their second read. So we could ask them up front to make that something that they do again this year. I don't know. I might be the only one who shares that view, so I'd be interested to hear from the other committee members.
Yeah, I think it makes sense if it's possible, if they can push it a little bit.
I mean, it's just a challenging situation because cutting off 2 weeks from the budget process is rough. So that's the trade-off.
Now, I think what we need to do is we need to go back to the city and see if we can do something, for their second, for the second meeting of the month, whether it's on the 18th or the 25th. If they're pushing it to the 25th, then that's still before the 26th. And if they're moving it up to the 11th, then we could do it on the 11th. And I think that to me makes sense, and we can work. It buys us 2 weeks one way or the other. Buys us 2 or 3 weeks. So.
Sorry,
Okay.
My internet went unstable. I support that. Did you get Mr. Yusuf's comments on that as well?
Yeah.
You support that as well, Mr. Yusuf?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we'll move on from the calendar conversation. Great,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay. The next item on the agenda was just trying to give you insight into the process that's ongoing, leading up to bringing a budget on the 15th. And so I know that I've reviewed this with Mr. Burke. So he's seen this, and the overall arc of the process, I think, is I think it's your next slide, Kathy. No, the next slide in the deck, I think. That now, where's the slide that outlines what our internal process is? Thought we had a slide for that. There we go. So, right now we're doing the work to sort of build an understanding of what currently is, and begin to project what people need for the coming year. And so, this is getting Kathy the information that she needs to be able to build a budget process. In February is when we are doing the bulk of the decision making. One of the key variables that we're going to talk about in a minute is the EPS funding, the state funding for schools, and so we will get that towards the end of January, and that's a fundamental building block as we enter into those conversations in February about what are the things that we are bringing forward. So right now, the work is all about building the current state and people's needs for next year, so that we can then make some decisions between early February, when we have all of those initial variables in, and the end of the month, when we need to then shift into the preparation and getting all the modules built, getting the budget book built, and the presentation and all those other things leading up to the March 15th presentation. So the spreadsheet that you have in the deck provides that at a more sort of at a finer grain size in terms of what are the specific activities and who's doing what by when. But the broader arch of the process is this current work that is underway now, the sort of decision-making phase in February, and in preparation of the budget that I'm going to bring to you, and then the actual preparation of that budget.
Thanks. I have no questions or comments. To any members of the committee have questions or comments here? Thanks for the window in.
Yeah. Okay, and now we're going to shift into just some of the work that we're already doing to build out some of those foundational building blocks, and Kathy's going to walk you through those.
Okay. So this is just a high-level overview of two of the major components of our state funding formula. So the state funding formula is typically referred to as EPS, and the information is reflected on the ED 279 report. And that one that we're referring to for FY23 hasn't been published yet as of the date of this presentation. So there are more than two major components in it, but there are two major components that we felt prepared to introduce today. So one is the state valuation, and that's used to determine the local required contribution by each municipality. So the higher the state valuation, the greater the municipal contribution is expected to be based on an ability to pay assumption that says that taxpayers with higher property values in their municipality are more able to afford and support education costs. And the state valuation is multiplied by the state mill rate, and that's how they calculate the municipal contribution or the state share, the school share. And the state mill rate has yet to be determined. And then the second component is just the student demographics. So those are the pupil counts that are additional components of the EPS funding formula. There are many, but we know that the higher the student counts, the more funding is allocated to a school district. And if the student count decreases, which is the scenario we're facing headed into FY23, the amount of funding typically decreases. So the next slide just talks about the EPS formula for the state valuation. And typically the valuation for 2023 is going to be the average of 2021, 2020, and 2019. And it's the lesser of that or the 2022 valuation. And in this case, we're fairly confident that we're going to be going with the lower of the three would be the average. So the 10.4 billion is actually the average of these 3 years. And that's what's going to be the basis for that. And while the state valuation is just one component of the EPS formula, an increase such as this typically reduces the state contribution and it will increase the school's share. And the second component is the student data. So as you can see from the schedule, we are anticipating a reduction based on our pupil counts compared to last year. And again, this is only one component of the state funding formula, but a reduction in students may reduce the state EPS allocation and increase the school's contribution again. So the next slide is just a historical overview of what the tax rates have been for on the school side and the property tax levy, which is the amount of property taxes that are raised to support the school budget. And the main area that I really particularly wanted to bring to the Finance Committee's attention is just that we've had a revaluation. So the valuation increased from about 8.2 billion to 14.6 billion in total for the cities on the city evaluation. And so that reflected a lower tax rate. So what we're going to be doing when we compare to next year, we're going to be looking at the $6.77 tax rate after revaluation when we're comparing to what we're going to go into. So the city side of the tax rate is currently $6.22. Ours is $6.77. The total combined tax rate is $12.99 as it compares right now. And I'd like to say as an example, the higher the base or the denominator upon which you calculate the tax rate, will determine that the rate will decrease. So as an example, like 1/12 is much smaller than 1/6. So that's why the rate looks like it's been cut in half. But the valuations have gone up. And then the next slide just shows what the tax rate impact would be. So if all factors stayed the same and there was no change in the city valuation, which is now a higher, the 14.6 billion here. If there were no change in that or any other aspects or factors related to our FY 23 budget and we just wanted to increase the budget by $1 million, that would be an effect of a 1% increase in the tax rate if nothing else changed. So the assumption is that if your budget goes up $1 million, then you'd have to raise property taxes by $1 million. And the rate would go from the 677 that it is currently to 684, or a 7 cents or 1% increase. So for every $1 million increase in the budget with no other changes, you'd have a 1% increase in the tax rate. We know that that probably won't be the case, but that just kind of gives a little perspective. The next slide will show the impact on the tax rate with a preliminary increase in the city valuation. So if the city valuation increased and all other factors remain the same, then we would be able to increase the budget by only about $677,000 before we saw a tax increase. So in this case, this is not an arbitrary $100 million valuation increase. I actually discussed that with the city, and that was a preliminary estimate that they provided. So if we anticipate that $100 million in the valuation went up and everything else stayed the same, the tax rate would stay the same until we went over $677,000 as a budget increase.
Can we pause before we get into that and just make sure that board members have an opportunity to ask any questions about all of this? Because the next thing that we're going to talk about is what we know are some of the pressures that are going to be on us that are going to, increase the budget by more than $677,000.
Yes.
So I just want to make sure that you understand. I think I know that both Adam and Emily have been through this a number of times. Yusuf, you were through it last year, but if there's anything that you need to have us spend a little bit more time around EPS, broadly those two categories of EPS, or this particular set of slides around the city valuation. And, basically what my question to Kathy is, every $1 million of additional spending is going to look like what on the city tax rate? And so that's what these two slides are attempting to show you, that, if there is no increase in the valuation, which there will be, but, assuming there isn't, for every $1 million, it'll be about 7 cents on the mill rate.
I just want to double check if the decrease that you mentioned in the earlier slide is from the enrollment.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Back a slide, Kathy, to the to this one, right? Yeah.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Ms. Figueroa.
I guess I have a quick question. Is we still don't think that the state is going to, as they did last year, adjust enrollment figures, given that most districts are seeing similar trends? We don't know.
No, don't know anything different from what I shared with you guys before about that. So,
okay, thank you.
And I don't know, Kathy, have you heard anything other than that?
I haven't. They've really cautioned us to what we should share, given that there are so many factors that haven't been determined yet.
I'm sorry, will you remind us when there's a particular deadline for when we get the final information from the state, right?
Yeah, the statutory deadline is in February, I think. I don't remember, February 1st, February 7th, or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
And this administration has always tried to get us to us earlier than that. So they've done a very nice job of, getting it to us at the end of January. And that's still what I'd heard that we would be looking at. So.
Okay. I don't have any questions.
Okay. So pressures.
So these are some of the elements that we're expecting to impact the budget coming up on the expenditure side and the revenue side. And the cost of services, of course, is expected to increase. There are gas surcharges that have been applied to invoices. We've already seen this, other price increases that are being passed on to the consumer. Depending on what variation of the CPI you look at, the consumer price index is showing between a 4 and a 7% increase since last December. And we have the region renegotiated base contract that was expected to result in higher salary and benefit costs coming up. The teacher and the EdTech contracts have yet to be renegotiated, so those are also expected to result in higher personnel costs. The bargaining unit increases may impact non-bargaining pay scales as well. We've added some positions to the local budget, primarily related to special ed and HR, community outreach, enrollment related, and special teachers positions at the schools, some around the pandemic, some not. Charges passed on to the school for city services are expected to increase. They've notified us that some of their costs, their charges, they do work for us in field maintenance and playground maintenance. Those costs will be going up. We've gotten notification that our general liability and other insurances are expected to increase. We know our dues, fees, and licenses are expected to increase. The price of natural gas is pretty high right now, and the utilities are anticipated to increase. And also during just this year, we've outsourced services due to staffing shortages, and these are expected to continue throughout the pandemic. We are still in discussions about how much we think these things are going to increase and haven't heard back from all of our vendors yet. So we don't have a definite dollar amount or a percentage to share at this time, but we know it's coming. And then on the revenue side, the Maine Care Medicaid reimbursement, especially that portion that was related to the BREATHE program, is expected to significantly decrease compared to previous estimates. And we anticipate the food service revenue is going to see some shortfalls due to significantly fewer meals being served. So we know all of these factors will be impacting what we present for the superintendent's budget. Are there any questions on any of this? Okay. And that's really that, yeah.
Yeah, very quick question, Kathy. The renegotiation and the bargaining and salary and benefit costs, how the level can be? Is it very high, it comes sometimes, or the expectation of the increase?
Yeah, I mean, for a measure of, so we just finished the base contract. And, if you recall, I don't remember exactly if it's 3.25 or 3.5, but that's what next year's increase is for that bargaining unit. So, you can expect that will be the basis for, discussions with other units, right? They know that that's what we negotiated. And so that will definitely be, a minimum expectation, I'm going to say, for those units. Doesn't mean that that's where we will settle, but that, I think there is, in all likelihood, a significant increase that you can expect in salary costs for, our other two major units. And, as Kathy reflects here, for the non-bargaining pay scales. The other reality is, that first bullet is that the consumer price index, is up by 7%. So people, are expecting raises that are, higher than they may have been in the past because that, everything is costing more. And so I think that, that is why it's important for us to put this in front of you, that there are additional costs beyond, we're not going to just roll over the budget. We're going to roll over the budget and apply some, escalators to it based on what we expect, some of those expenses are going to be. The benefit costs, we don't define those. Those are defined by our insurance company, and we won't have those numbers until, usually late March, early April. They sometimes give us they'll give us a range sometime in February. Say you can expect a range of increase that goes from, 2% to 14% is, I think, what we got in the, last year. And we wound up on the 2% side of that as opposed to on the 14% side. But that's part of what we will actually have to build into our budget that we will bring to you on March 15th will, account for all of those things with everything else. And, as we put that together in front of you. The one that I wanted to dwell on for a second is the Maine Care reimbursement for Breathe. For those of you who have been on the Finance Committee, for the past 2 years that we've had, certain projections that we were looking to realize, in terms of reimbursements, Medicaid reimbursements for our day treatment programming in particular. And we have not come anywhere near being able to meet those projections. And so what I've asked the team to do is to give us a realistic, a realistic projection on what we can, get reimbursed from Medicaid for those services based on what we've historically been able to do, not what, we would like to be able to do. So that is going to be a very significant, that's going to be a very significant increase right there for us to be able to retain the level of programming that we currently do in Breathe without accounting for that Medicaid money will mean, that there's going to be more general fund that's required to be able to sustain those services.
I have a question about that, and then an additional question. Is the Maine Care reimbursement related to staffing and and not having adequate capacity to go through what I know is very intense paperwork demands? Or
I think there's multiple. It's not a single thing. There's multiple things. That's one of them. But I also think that we built on some projections that that are just unrealistic in terms of what percentage of our time we're actually going to be able to bill legitimately that, may have applied in a different context, but don't apply in ours. And, so this is why I think that it's important for us to just recognize that the original projections on which we built our Medicaid reimbursement revenue for that program are, fundamentally, overstated, and we need to come to terms with that.
Okay, I understand. And then, clearly this is all a lot, but it's also, critical that we continue to take the steps forward needed to implement the Portland Promise. So I'm wondering if at this stage we have identified clear additional investments that we want to make this year to move forward on our plan, on the Portland Promise.
I mean, I guess the answer to that is no, we don't have like a clear, defined set of, initiatives that we want to advance. We really, we want to continue to scale up our pre-kindergarten. That's a commitment that the board has made that, we want to continue to move in that direction. We believe that we took some very important steps last year. We want to be able to sustain those, and that's a primary focus. And I think you saw the curriculum presentation the other day that talked about all of those other areas that are, fundamental to us being able to continue our work, much of which is funded by federal funds and that we need to come to terms with. We may not need to do that this year, but, our focus right now is on sustaining the things that we've started and, meeting the commitments to scaling up in, areas like pre-kindergarten. There are some adjustments that we will need to make of, in special education and ELL around the, the staffing allocations for those programs. So I think that those are that's the other major thing. And other than that, it'll be small things here and there that, like, for example, we're going to be talking on Tuesday about the takeaways from our conversations with members of our Latinx community and what are, there are some, programmatic implications that come from that. And so, but those are in the sort of scheme of all of these things on here. They're, incremental increases that are not, that are not huge, but we don't, that's the work that we're doing in February and, trying to make decisions about what we can advance and what we can't advance in order to be able to bring you a budget that, that will be approved ultimately by the voters.
And will this year's budget be able to include the changes we're making to standardize high school staffing?
Yeah, that's also part of the work that we're doing. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't have any questions here. All my questions come when we get down the road. So thanks for this presentation and the foreshadowing of what we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. That's as intended. So we've already gone through this. And, so any other, questions that you have before we move into the next portion of our agenda, which is our CIP?
Questions from the committee?
Excellent. Thank you.
No? Okay.
So let's move then into CIP, and we have Mr. Sherwood here with us to help us guide. And I know that Steve is also here. He's tending to his wife who had an accident a week ago, and so he's doing that, but he'll join us, I'm sure, shortly. So what we wanted to do today is talk about the proposed capital improvement plan. For those of you who were on the operations committee and not a part of the finance committee, you're familiar with much of this, but since we're now a combined committee, we're doing this here. What we wanted to do today is sort of bring you up to speed to where things have gone since we last talked about it with the committee, which was back in October. So in the packet, you have the what we were planning to submit to the city for consideration, which we haven't brought formally to the school board because of the transitions along the way, but we will, be bringing to the school board shortly. But it's been adjusted slightly. So what I wanted to do today is walk you through, what was back in, back in October, what our proposal was, what our proposal is currently now, and then some adjustments to that based on conversations that we have been having with city staff as they, as they've asked us to enter things into the system and so on. So, and then the last document in the packet is the 6-year CIP, which again, the operations committee has seen. It's basically, not just this year, but, last year and the next 5 years of capital improvement plans. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug. Doug, if you could start with what we looked at in October, and then the adjustments that we're recommending, and then the potential reductions based on conversations with city staff.
Good evening, everyone. I appreciate this opportunity to speak with you all. Superintendent Bataan, do you have the actual spreadsheets to display?
Yep. You want me to do that?
Yes, please.
All right.
So as that gets worked up for those who are joining us somewhat anew in our process of the capital improvement program, we had a fairly extensive, comprehensive assessment done of our facilities back in 2017. The outcrop of that report indicated that over the next 20 years, we should be investing $320 million over 20 years to keep the buildings in their currently up-to-date shape, not considering new programs and new initiatives, hence why you've seen so many things in a bigger picture going to the state for bigger projects. So, we're never going to see $16 million a year. We were fortunate the last few years to be engaged in about $4 to $5 million a year. We were presented to the Ops Committee back in October, the chart that you see in front of you now, which reflects a sustained investment in that same strategy of roughly $4.6 million. We are looking at continuing work that we had started in previous years, and we'll reflect on that a little bit later here. But it's a fairly robust program based on a number of frameworks. The windows are at the top of this list in part due to the investment we've been making as a part of COVID and increasing and helping it in our investment in ventilation and air exchanges in the classrooms. We worked on 4 schools using federal funding last year, and this will be continuing the work at Deering and Portland High, and beginning some other continuing work that was in prior years at Moore and Talbot. We have a number of projects that we've been doing to increase security in the buildings. That's both security cameras and door access controls. The state recommends that we have a single control point of entry exit in each school. We're upgrading that particular capability and controls. The roof at Portland High, we have made an investment there since prior to my arrival at the school department, so it's more than 20 years. We've had a significant number of repairs over the last few years, and really want to try and get on top of this project. I think if I remember correctly, we originally brought this project forward in the FY19 program, and it's now bounced to FY23. The next project at Talbot was on our list of urgent issues to be addressed from an ADA standpoint. We're hoping that the project that we currently have working on kitchen, classroom counters and cabinets, as well as some restrooms, might be sufficient. We may be able to defer this work yet another year. And then this next set of projects, the HVAC projects, are things that we joined with the roof project at Portland High and had this school department, school board's endorsement to send to the state for revolving renovation funding. So those particular applications have gone and were sent in previously and are now currently being evaluated by the team at DOE. The other projects towards the bottom of the list were items carried over from that facility assessment that had very near term and near needing to be addressed. And then the last item, transportation bus, part of the 10-year replacement plan for the transportation department. So you see the framework here of a number of projects, 4.6 million. We were very optimistic to bring this whole package forward, as we had in past years, last year being somewhat of a stall back. But we were told in our meeting on December 14th with the city that 4.6 million was probably not sustainable.
Before we get there, Doug, let's just walk through the adjustment. So is it 0 or 1, the one that reflects the increase in the HVAC? Right.
That's the 0, so that would be the next one, correct?
Yeah. Oops, too much. Can you see that okay? Oh, did I open the wrong one?
Yeah, it should be Rev 1. I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. So this is the first set of revisions. This is just adjustments. I'll let Doug explain them. So this is what you just saw, but.
Towards the end of December, early January, we were approached by the state to say perhaps our estimates for the HVAC work were a little bit short. We did use, as I said, the 2017 numbers inflated from our LaValle-Bressinger report, but I believe neglected that we should be addressing the COVID impacts as well as the marketplace supply chain issues. So at the state's request, we adjusted the numbers to reflect current market conditions. And you see those increases in those particular lines for King, PAS, and more. And a note off to the right shows the original number that we sent to the state. The value of that particular project as projected at that point in time in October. And then the new numbers are reflected in the 2022 column adjoining those particular projects. King Middle School replaced rooftop HVAC units, PAS replaced rooftop HVAC units, and the more replaced rooftop HVAC units. And
So the increase was from 4.6 to 4.9. And all of that was in adjustments to the HVAC costs and would have, are to be assumed in the funding that we expect to get from the state for those. Okay, and now, Doug, your conversations with city staff.
Yeah, so we'd head to the Rev 2 edition slide. So this particular iteration tries to address the comments that we received from our meeting with the city, noting that the 4.6, now 4.9 would not be supportable, but also trying to find a way home to deliver what we know is necessary for improvements to the buildings across the system. And we're still struggling with some of the aspects of the work because the number is obviously still probably too high at 3.4, but we needed to do our best to keep the state revolving renovation fund projects in the mix, which are the Portland High roof and then just the structural side that's going to the state, and then the 3 rooftop HVAC units at King, PAS, and more. But as we were building this list and we saw all these needs, unfortunately, we had a boiler failure at PAS and actually need to swap out what you see here on the list for Lincoln Middle School for the new boiler that needs to be replaced at PAS. We actually have a temporary boiler out there now, hopefully carrying the load in extreme conditions, but the boiler has failed and won't pass inspection and needs to be replaced certainly before the next heating season, and probably won't have time or won't be able to get the equipment we need to do this heating season. So the standby temporary is keeping things operational when necessary, but we need a new boiler in place before the next heating season. So that makes that significantly urgent. It's an issue of health and safety. that doesn't fit the criteria of the state revolving renovation fund, unfortunately. The other projects that you see that I tried to make a strong pitch for in my first part of this presentation, it looks like we need to, defer the work on the windows to the next year, as well as the door controls, but continue with the other 3 phases that we're working on door controls. Defer the smaller projects that were at the bottom of the list and still keep the bus in play. I see this going forward in future meetings, looking at the review and where we stand on the state list for revolving renovation fund, of perhaps being a balanced one approach would be we secure the funding from the state and we proceed with those projects and negotiate for whatever the number might be with the city. Or if we don't get those numbers, maybe revisiting this in total and saying what is most important for our students and staff in the buildings. And maybe you put the roof off yet again and do the windows based on the dollar value only, not necessarily the urgency. So again, we're looking at 4.6 not being sustainable, but I don't believe we received a number yet that says what's realistic. And I would say that number probably approaches 2 million as opposed to the 3.4 they have on this slide.
Are you ready for some questions, Mr. Sherwood? I see Chair Figdore's hand up.
Doug, can you remind me what we've what our CIP figure has been for the past few years? I know I know last year was an anomaly, but 3.4 is within the realm of what we've.
Yeah, 3.4 was in the realm of what we've had previously. We've got a few years that were over 4 million and 5 to 2.5. We took a pause last year and just did the urgently needed, the during high entrance and a few other things that came up in process after we said we'd do a complete pause. We got just over a little over $1 million, but that 3.4 is in the ballpark of what we've had in the past, and certainly mid-range to say average of the last 5 years.
I mean, my sense is certainly, given that we did take a pause last year, dropping from 4.6 to 3.4 it might be more than we need. This feels. I mean, we have urgent needs that are continuing to get deferred, and I guess I would like to see us push. Continue to work with the city to see if we can get more of the full list done this year.
Right. The other counterpoint to this is that the city has actually advertised to all departments that the total for the citywide on the open capital improvement program will be 10.5 million. So if it's 3.4, that's we're approaching a third of the city's budget for capital in that particular year. Not saying that it's not something that we should broach and try to secure. I'm just saying that's the number compression that we're hearing from them.
And Doug, I think it's also important for the board to understand that, in this, slide that you're seeing here with the projects that are going to the state for funding, that, two things. One, that, we get 30% of that amount is written off, by the state. So that will actually, we'll bond it, but then we'll get it back. And these are 0% interest loans. And I'm saying that, and I'm not, in the minute I said it, I wasn't sure that it's 0%, but it's a very, very low rate. Doug, is it 0 or is it a low rate?
It's 0.
It's 0. So there is no, there is no interest being accrued on that. Obviously, paying off that that loan, but without any additional costs associated with, and 30% off of that. So if you sort of do, a rough calculation, $1 million of this 3 million is interest-free, and 300,000 of it is rebated, so it's really 700,000. So anyway,
And the city was aware of that. The city manager was aware of that context.
Yes,
They're aware of the context that there is, an approach that we're using through the state that we've used the last 3 years, and finance department's quite well aware of it. In fact, they handle all the bonding for any of the capital improvement, including what we've done through the state revolving renovation fund. So yes, they are aware, and the council as well.
Forgive me if my information's outdated, but do I recall that we were backlogged on our completion of previously funded projects, and that was part of why we were pausing last year? So have we made progress on that punch list? I'm sorry.
Yes, you are correct. Because last year was to give us also an opportunity to work on catching up on other projects that hadn't been executed from prior years.
Yeah. And your second question was, have we made progress? We've made some, not huge progress, but I do want to point out that we were and I think Mr. Youssef will recall this from our conversations with the operations committee. We were strategic about where we placed these, which projects we sought to advance, so that we were actually advancing projects that are currently associated with the backlog. So the windows, for example, part of our backlog is Windows work that's already committed. So a phase one. So this was bringing the phase two into that, scope of work. So we didn't need to do additional engineering and all of those things that have hung up those projects. And we were able to fall into those, door access controls. That's, stuff that it's phase 4 of 5, and we're backlogged with phases 3 and 2. And, so it's, but those are things that we're already in the work of, scoping out and getting contracts for. So that was our approach, if you will, as we built out this year's CIP request.
Thanks for that information. Mr. Youssef, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, I do have a quick question. So did you say the HVAC is the area that the state says the estimation is low?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So what we're doing, if I'm getting right, the city says 4.9 is not supportable, and we're looking to adjust that low estimation and then also fulfill what the city wants.
Yeah, like I said, the city has advised that the total for the citywide program for the capital improvement FY23 will be 10.5 million. We will see some advantage, as the superintendent's already said, with the state revolving renovation fund, paying off 30% of the loan and having it be a 0% loan. So the extent of that is not significant. But we also know that our needs are great, as the chair has said, about trying to hold the line on the 3.4, and that will be kind of why we put the chart together the way you see it, is that you want to show that we recognize that we are competing with others, but we still have needs that need to get done, like the boiler at Paths, and we've got to get started on the roof at Real High at some point. And then the other projects come in. If they get supported by the state, let's go. And certainly we do want to keep our bus fleet currently operating performantly and effectively. I think this particular bus is being replaced after 150,000 miles, and I don't know how many other issues related to maintenance. So.
Thank you.
I'll just say that I don't want us to drop this figure lower than 3.4. It's already lower than I would like, given the needs. I hear what you're saying in terms of the city's guidance to all departments, but I don't want to see us drop this number lower than it is. Yeah.
So our that's guidance that we, will obviously carry forward, and we're going to continue to be in conversations with the city about this, and bring something through the committee that will eventually go to the board for approval within the next couple of months. So that's the plan. And I think that's it on the CIP. So the last item, unless you have other questions, I don't want to cut you off.
I don't see any more questions.
Okay. Yeah, so the last item was just an opportunity for departments to just update you, given that it's our first meeting of the year. This is generally something that we do with the operations department. So I know Jane's here, Steve, and Joel isn't. I'll do a little bit of an update for the transportation department, and then we'll conclude. So Jane, do you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about, where the food service department is? What are some of the challenges that you're facing, and, things that you think are important for the committee to understand?
Good evening, everybody. Nice to see everyone. Happy New Year. We have, like everybody else, had a very challenging year moving forward, but we are positive and that we are continuing to be able to feed all the kids here in Portland, and feel like we've done that with the same level of quality that we've had in the past. We still have current vacancies that we've had since the beginning of the school year, but are working towards those as well. We're down to 4 positions that are currently left unfilled. We have an 8-hour cook position that is in process, so we're hoping that that one gets filled in the short term. And then some 2-hour positions at Casco, King, and more. But we are also running without any substitutes, and with this COVID sickness going around, seems that we are continuing to be short-staffed in each area differently as that goes on. So we've been juggling staffing around in order to fill the positions that we've needed in order to continue the services that we provide to the schools. We hope that that continues to get better as the year goes on, as it has since September. We did have a shortfall in our budget last year, short of revenues because of the decreased participation in the program. For those that are new to the department, food services gets reimbursed on the amount of meals that we've served. And last year, when we had the kids in hybrid, as well as all remote, when they weren't in school, we didn't have the opportunity to feed those kids. And our pickup, it was very low participation. So the revenue that we brought in was less than we had anticipated in the school year. So we did have a shortfall in our revenues last year. We are doing better this year with the kids in school. We are affected each time we do have those kids out, but we are currently, doing well with the kids that are there. The USDA has wonderfully offered to pay for all those kids. So the USDA is covering all of the costs of those meals, or reimbursing us for those meals, and there's no cost for the parents. So we're feeding all the kids free of charge across the country. So that's a wonderful thing. We are also getting a higher reimbursement rate than we would typically get, because we are offering that summer, we're running under what they call a seamless summer option. And we're receiving a higher reimbursement rate this year than we would typically get. And they have just increased that again. So we're adding another quarter onto our reimbursement rate for the rest of this school year. So which will help us get through the end of this current school year. Our concerns are next year, as we don't know what program we'll be running under, and I've used the reimbursement rates from the National School Lunch Program in next year's budget allocations or revenue planning, because we don't know if there'll be anything different. We're also going to receive, the state of Maine has passed a law that they are going to refund the parent portion of the meal. So we'll get reimbursements for the meals from the feds, for the federal reimbursement rate, and then the state will cover the other portion. So meals will still be moving forward free to all students in the state of Maine, and we'll get those funding pieces from two different areas, which is a great option for our kids. And it's great for us too, because we'll know that the reimbursement is coming in from those two funding sources, and that parents don't need to pay for those kids. We have seen a drop in participation, especially at our secondary level. And we have planned for that, or have done that in our budget planning and moving forward. The other piece is the community eligibility program. We currently have 4 schools in our CEP program. The rules around that program are that you must have at least 40% of the kids within the school as part of your direct certification, which comes from the state. Those 4 schools that we currently have in CEP are East End, Presumpscot, Reiki, and Talbot. We do not have to reapply this year, Javier. That we heard from the state this year, which was very good news. But I am concerned watching the numbers for Presumpscot. They're currently only at a level of 33%. So we'll have to watch them for the upcoming school year, whether or not they get dropped. I don't think it'll affect participation because the meals will still be free to the families. There will be just different operations and how we have to operate within the school.
And is the reimbursement rate lower if it's not for CEP? No, it's the same.
No. One big concern that both Javier and I have is our free and reduced applications, because families don't need to fill out the application process for the food service process and to receive those free meals. We did not get as many applications back as we had wanted to. And because of that data feeds so many other areas within the school department, I think it's some area that we really need to get some help and really get some information out to families about how that information is used within the school department and how many things it affects to try and get those applications back at the beginning of the school year. So we continue to do our due diligence and trying to get those out, and we mail them out to all households at the beginning of the school year within the first, prior to 2 weeks before the start of school. We pre-fill those applications. We send them out in a pre-addressed stamped envelope to try and get those back. But we're going to probably really need your help in trying to get that information out to our families, to get that information back and get the data in for the district. Okay, that's my little spiel. Anybody have any questions?
Thanks, Jane.
Javier?
No, just I was going to say, any questions for Jane? I'll just say that, Jane has been doing amazing work with, obviously very short-staffed. And where did you work today in addition to Central Kitchen?
Up to Casco Bay.
That's a normal day. But
yeah, it's a normal day.
Thanks for everything that you do, Jane.
Thank you.
I don't have questions, but I want to say thanks, Jane. Thanks for feeding all our kids and feeding all our kids well. I was just sharing feedback back with Avery Yale, Camilla, about our vegan hot lunch program, and had great conversations with my kids about what they like and what they enjoy. So you continue to go above and beyond with less than a minimum amount of resources. And so thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
We're at time, so I don't know if you want to, I think you're going to hear similar things on the, on the facilities and maintenance side in terms of the staffing shortages and things along those lines. Clearly the same around transportation. So I don't know if you want to do that, or we can, build these into subsequent meetings. It's up to you.
My preference would be that if it's not going to take us too much longer, that we respect folks' time who've been here, let them do it tonight, not ask them back again for that, if that's the will of the committee as well. Yeah. See, Emily shaking her head. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I agree.
Steve, do you want to talk a little bit about where you are?
Yeah, sure. I'll be brief. The base contract is a huge commitment to the custodial staff, well thought through, and give stabilization to wages with everything going on. The biggest driver for facilities is a pandemic. It's ripped open air quality, windows, deficiencies in our buildings that have been neglected for resource reasoning, but they're not going away. We have bills in the State House winding through the legislature from forever chemical testing. Water testing in general has been part of facilities, but we're looking at an unknown amount of legislation coming for air quality improvements to schools. So that'll be a challenge. I think everything related to pandemic, from cleaning protocols to supervision to training to the great staff that the Portland Public Schools have in both maintenance and custodial areas, the commitments are there. The leadership is there at the right level, making great strides there. Those are challenges that we're going to face for many years to come. So as you indicated, Chair Figdor, we're always battling for more CIP, more operational funding under a very stressed system. So I feel good about where we're at as a department after 2 years of the pandemic. Mr. Sherwood's retiring gives us an opportunity to reevaluate and distribute responsibilities and authorities and some leadership aspects there to support the 17 schools in our department. So it's a great loss to have Doug to retire, but it's also an opportunity to take a step back and look at the future needs for the facilities and how we can continue to support the great teachers, administrators, and our students and teachers in the district. So I think we're headed in the right direction. The headwinds are strong at times, so we just keep the tiller over and keep rolling. So thanks for everybody's support. It's been one hell of a 2 years. So let's get rid of Omicron here and let's get going. So that's all I have. Thank you.
I think you just dropped something in the middle of the, that I don't know that the board knew that
really?
What is going to be retiring in February.
In February, yes. So, you want to say something, Mr. Sherwood? Is he still there?
He may not. He may have stepped away. So we will definitely do something at the board for Doug before he fades away. So yeah.
I definitely didn't know. Oh, there he is.
Sorry about that. Yes, it's been a long tenure. I think a significant number of accomplishments. And as Steve had said, I'm very impressed by how we've stayed together and moved forward through the COVID process. And I had planned actually a little bit sooner departure, but with everything else going the way it's going, we've held on as long as we could, I think, to make things move forward. It's been a good 22 years here in Portland, and time to move on and experience the rest of the world and see family more frequently.
Ship has sailed.
Yeah, ship sails.
Doug, I'm shocked by the news. I can't even imagine Portland Public Schools facilities without you. And but this is so well earned. So well earned. Oh my goodness. Well, I look forward to honoring your time before the board, and I have my favorite Doug stories that I'm going to be happy to share with everyone. But overall, the fact that all of the facilities needs as a result of COVID and the demands on the facilities as a result of COVID, the fact that we're and we made good progress, from my standpoint, right out of the gates, dealing with a lot of the ventilation issues, and in as I see it, a fairly aggressive way. But not only did you do all that and meeting all the continuing demands, but we're renovating 4 elementary schools. So I'm amazed by you all, and I'm so grateful for your leadership. And I'm surprised by the news, but I'm so happy for you, Doug.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Right. And then, on transportation, I think we've talked numerous times about the challenges that we've been facing there with staffing all along. And I think that, to Steve's earlier point, we are, thrilled to have the changes that were approved as a result of the base contract to put us in a position to be able to solidify our staffing there. As the board knows, Joel Thoitz is looking to move out of the director's position. He and I are in conversations about him returning to the position that he was in before as the operations manager for the department, but we did post the position yesterday, and are actively and aggressively looking at candidates who had previously expressed interest in potentially getting that position filled quickly. Joel is awesome. He's I can't imagine what it's got to be like to be a transportation director, and to be a brand new transportation director in the middle of the pandemic is something that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. And I gave it to a good friend, and it's been incredibly challenging, and for his well-being and for his commitment to the district, which is longstanding and will continue to be, we need to honor his wishes around this and try to figure out a way to keep somebody who's deeply committed to the district continuing to do valuable work for us going forward. And that's what the conversations that he and I and his team are having right now. So he couldn't join us today because he has kiddos who are out of school tomorrow because of COVID. The whole school is out, so they went remote today, and so he let me know that he just he's got a bunch of things to get squared away. So. And that's all we have.
Okay. Well, thank you for all the updates. Definitely thanks for the catching of the big news that was dropped in the middle of the updates there. And
Steve and I have had a chance to coordinate closely enough, so it was
I think it was a very sweet way for it to come out.
We got to have a big party planning here. Come on.
Get the party planning committee together. Yes. Yeah. Thank you all for the updates this evening, and thanks for just everything that you're doing every day to carry us forward, as you've all shared. You know better than us on the board what it takes to do that. So just thank you. Is there any closing questions or comments from committee members? No.
Just want to say thank you, Doc. Thank you, Steve. The work that you guys do is amazing. And we have to have a party, as Steven said. Thank you.
Great. Superintendent, can you confirm for me that our next Finance and Operations Committee meeting will be the 10th of February? Is that correct?
Kathy, does that seem right? I'm struggling to find my calendar here real quick.
That would be the second Thursday if we're sticking to that.
That would be that's what we agreed to do. So yeah.
Okay. 6 o'clock on February 10th. Back here on Zoom. Thanks for working on that calendar and working to elongate that timeline so we have a little bit more space for our and public process. I appreciate that. I'm glad we drilled into that. Yep. Is that it? Were you coming off mute to confirm, Kathy?
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'll see you all in this format then. May I have a motion to adjourn tonight's committee meeting? Okay, motion, the second, and we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.